When you take a pill, have you ever stopped to think about how it's made? I mean, most medicines, they actually start out as these super fine, almost fluffy powders. And that powder, well, it's a massive headache for drug manufacturers. The solution is a really cool process called granulation. And today, we're going to dive into the latest and greatest tech that makes it all happen.
So here's the big question, right? How do you take something that's basically like flour and turn it into millions of perfectly identical tablets where every single one has the exact right dose? That's the puzzle we're going to unpack in this explainer.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with why powders are such a problem in the first place. Then we'll check out a really clever dry solution. After that, we'll look at some new ways scientists are reimagining the more common wet methods. And finally, we'll wrap up with why any of this actually matters for the medicine you might have at home.
Okay, first things first. Let's really get into the core challenge here. What is it about fine powders that makes them so difficult to work with?
The answer to the powder problem is a process called granulation. You know how brown sugar kind of clumps together? That's the basic idea here. You're just getting all those tiny particles to stick together and form bigger, more predictable clusters called granules. And this isn't just for convenience. It's absolutely critical for making sure every pill is safe and effective. Yeah, without granulation, you've got a real mess. Fine powders are terrible at flowing. It's like trying to pour dust. The different ingredients can also separate out, which is a huge deal, because that means one pill could have way too much active ingredient and the next could have way too little. Oh, and the dust is just everywhere. Granulation basically solves all of that. It creates this nice, uniform blend that flows smoothly and consistently.
Now, there are basically two ways to do this, with liquid or without. We're going to start with the dry method and look at a really cool innovation called pneumatic dry granulation.
Dry granulation, as you can probably guess, skips the liquid altogether. Instead, it just uses pressure. It literally squeezes the powder together. And the newest, smartest way to do this is a technology called PDG.
So take a look at how this works. It's actually pretty brilliant. First, the powder gets squeezed between these two rollers. That pressure forms a mix of good-sized granules and some leftover fine powder. But here's the clever part. A pneumatic system, that's just a fancy word for using air, blows the fine powder back up to the top to go through the rollers again, while the perfect granules get to move on. It's a continuous recycling loop.
And the benefits of this system are huge. Since there's no liquid and no heat involved, it's perfect for drugs that are sensitive to moisture or high temperatures. It's also super fast, and because of that clever recycling system, there's practically zero waste. Plus, it's all in a closed system, which makes it way safer for handling really potent drugs.
But even with all those perks, using a liquid binder or wet granulation is still the most popular method out there. So now, let's switch gears and see how scientists are breathing new life into this classic technique.
Right, so in traditional wet granulation, you're basically adding a liquid to act like glue for the powder. But that brings its own set of problems, like having to dry everything out afterwards, which takes a lot of time and energy. So researchers have been coming up with some really fascinating workarounds.
First on our list is steam granulation. And yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of spraying in liquid water, you blast hot steam directly into the powder. The steam instantly condenses on the particles, creating this ultra-thin layer of hot water that makes everything stick together. And as a bonus, all that heat actually helps speed up the drying process later.
So let's look at the trade-offs. On the plus side, it's fast, more eco-friendly, and it tends to make these really nice, round granules that can help the medicine dissolve better once it's in your body. But the big downside? It takes a ton of energy to create all that steam. And obviously, it's a complete no-go for any drug that breaks down with heat.
Okay, next up is foam granulation. And this idea is just genius. Instead of spraying a liquid, which can sometimes make some spots too wet, you add the binder as a foam. Seriously, think about shaving cream. The foam spreads out incredibly evenly, using way less water to get the job done.
The major win here is precision. Because that foam spreads the binder so perfectly, this method is amazing for really potent, low-dose drugs where you have just a tiny bit of the active ingredient that has to be mixed in perfectly. The catch is that it's still a relatively new technique, and scaling it up for massive production runs can still be a little tricky.
And for our last one, we've got a really clever hybrid called moisture-activated dry granulation, or MADG. With this method, you spray just a tiny bit of water, less than 5%, just enough to make the particles sticky. Then, instead of using heat to dry them, you just add another ingredient that acts like a sponge and simply absorbs all the extra moisture. This is why MADG is getting so popular. You completely skip the whole heating and drying step, which is usually a huge bottleneck that costs a lot of time and money. It makes the whole process way faster and more efficient, and you end up with these fantastic granules that are all ready to be turned into tablets. So, okay, we've just covered some pretty deep science: pneumatic systems, foam, steam. But why does any of this really matter? How does making a better granule actually affect us? It all comes down to something really simple. Better granulation means better medicine. Every single one of these innovations is all about one thing: making the final pill safer, more effective, and more reliable.
At the end of the day, all this work leads to more accurate doses, which means you're getting exactly the right amount of medicine every single time. They can make drugs last longer on the shelf. For the companies making them, it's cheaper and more efficient. And maybe most importantly, these new techniques are letting scientists create medicines with ingredients that were just too delicate or tricky to work with before. So the next time you pop open a bottle and take a simple pill, just take a second to think about the incredible science that turned it from a difficult powder into a perfect granule. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible innovations are hiding in your medicine cabinet?